The cabin was silent save for the wind pressing against the cracked wooden walls like a restless ghost. A man lay motionless on the floor, face pale, breath shallow, blood drying into his collar. The fire had long since died. The last of its heat was fading into the cold of Montana's endless winter. For 3 days he hadn't moved. Most folks would have called him dead. But then, his fingers twitched. He coughed just once and the sound broke the quiet like a rifle shot in church. Eyes fluttering open, he blinked at the ceiling, unsure whether this was still Earth or something after. Then he saw it, a half-burned envelope in the ashes of the hearth. The name on it, barely visible beneath the scorch marks, Margaret Rose. His heart clenched like a fist. That name, after all these years. He dragged himself upright, pain shooting through every joint like lightning through old fence wire. One arm cradled his ribs. The other reached for the letter, what was left of it. As he held it, he whispered, hoarse as gravel, "Guess I ain't finished yet." He stood slow, stiff, but he stood. Out the window, the snow was still falling sideways, fierce and thick. But he opened the door anyway. The wind hit him like a punch, but he didn't flinch. He stared out at the nothingness ahead. And from somewhere deep in his chest, a place untouched for decades, a voice rose. "This ain't a story about revenge or glory. It's about silence and what it does to a man." They called him Old Boone, not Mr. Boone, not Silas. Just Old Boone, like he was a place more than a person. A rusted landmark that folks passed without really seeing. He lived in a leaning cabin at the far edge of Dry Willow, a town so small even the mapmakers forgot it. No wife, no children. No stories shared over whiskey at the saloon. Just him, the land, and the sound of wind brushing past like it was trying to whisper secrets he'd stopped caring to hear. Every Sunday just after sunrise, someone would leave a small loaf of bread wrapped in cloth on his front step. No note, no knock, just bread. At first, Boone didn't touch it. Thought it might be poisoned or worse, kindness. But after the third Sunday, his stomach won that argument. He ate it in silence, the way you eat something you didn't earn. Turns out it was a boy, no more than 10. Dark eyes, skin the color of desert clay, and a limp in his right leg. He never said a word. Couldn't, they said. Born that way. His name was Elias. Boone watched him once from the shadows behind the curtain, small hands placing the bread, then backing away like a deer, unsure if it was being hunted or fed. There was something quiet about the boy, not just silent, but quiet. The kind of quiet that came from understanding too much, too young. Boone understood that kind of quiet. They never spoke, of course. Boone didn't talk to people, not anymore. But he started leaving small things outside a rusted horseshoe Elias might find curious, or a pine carving of a bird he'd made with shaking hands. Nothing fancy, just something that said, "I see you, kid." And Elias would always return, always place the bread just a little closer to the door, as if inch by inch he was trying to pull Boone back into the world. But Boone wasn't sure he wanted to come back. He'd seen too much of the world, buried too many brothers in too many bad soils, fell in love once, the kind that burns slow but never dies. And then, without even meaning to, he left it all behind. Never wrote, never returned, just disappeared into the wind like so many cowards do. But the thing about silence, it doesn't bury your past, it preserves it. Every creak of the floorboard in that cabin sounded like a memory. Every gust of wind reminded him of the things he should have said but didn't. Some nights when the moon was full and the coyotes kept quiet, he'd pull out an old tin box from under the bed. Inside was a silver ring blackened at the edges. It once belonged to Margaret Rose, the only woman who ever saw the man beneath the rifle. She used to call him Wasi, said he carried his sadness like a saddle worn smooth always with him. He never told Elias about her, never told anyone. Some things were too sharp to speak. But each Sunday, when that boy came walking up the ridge with a loaf in hand, Boone felt something shift like a stubborn frost cracking under spring's first sun. He began to wait for the knock that never came. He began to expect the silence on the porch. And that scared him more than dying. Because hope, when you haven't felt it in decades, ain't soft. It's terrifying. It came on a Wednesday. Snow was falling sideways, thick as wool, hiding even the pines that framed the cabin, like quiet sentries. Boone was splitting wood, slow, methodical, like the rhythm helped keep the ghosts away. He didn't hear the steps, didn't hear the door creak. But when he turned, the bread was there as always. Only this time, Something else was tucked underneath the cloth. A folded piece of paper, typewritten, no stamp, no name. He brought it inside with shaking fingers, set it on the table like it might explode. He stared at it for a long time, firelight flickering against the walls. Then finally he unfolded it. You left without saying goodbye, but I never stopped looking. He doesn't know who you are. Not yet, but I do. Boone's knees gave out. He sank into the old chair by the hearth, the paper trembling in his grip. The room didn't feel cold anymore. It felt like 1869 again. Back then the war had just ended. The country was still bleeding, and so was he. He rode into the town of Hollow Creek with a busted leg and a broken promise. Margaret was there, hair the color of honey, voice like a hymn, and eyes that didn't flinch when they saw what the war had done to him. She ran the boarding house. He rented room 2 and promised it'd only be for a week. He stayed 9 months. They talked in whispers late at night, the oil lamp burning low between them. Talked about land children, a wedding in spring under the cottonwoods. But spring came, and he didn't. One letter came instead, written with dirt on his hands and guilt in his blood. I ain't good for you, Maggie. I'm leaving before I ruin what's still decent. He never sent it. It sat in his coat pocket, folded and worn until rain turned it to pulp. Instead, he just left. And now here it was, decades later, his sins circling back through the snow. That letter on the table wasn't a message. It was a reckoning. He read it again, searching for a name. Nothing. But the last line burned into his chest like hot iron. He doesn't know who you are. Boone stared out the frosted window into the direction Elias always came from. His gut twisted. Not from fear, but from recognition. The boy, the bread, the dark eyes. Could it be? No, it couldn't. Margaret would have written. Would have cursed him at least. She was never one to keep quiet. But what if she tried? What if the silence wasn't cruelty, but distance? What if she died thinking he never loved her? The thought struck him harder than the war ever did. That night, Boone didn't sleep. He pulled the tin box from beneath his bed again. Inside was the old silver ring, still cold as regret. He held it tight, bone-white knuckles trembling, and whispered, I never meant to vanish. I just didn't know how to stay. He stared into the fire until his eyes burned. Then he wrote, hands stiff, ink smudging, but he wrote, to the boy with silent steps. If you are who I think you are, then there's more to tell than I got years left to say. But I'll try. Lord help me, I'll try. He didn't sign it. Didn't know if he had the right. The next morning he folded the page carefully, wrapped it in cloth, set it on the step. No bread that day. But when Elias returned at sundown, he saw the note, took it in his small hands. And this time Boone didn't close the door. He let it stay cracked. Just enough for the firelight to spill into the snow. Just enough to say, I'm still here. The boy didn't knock, he never did. But that night with the firelight glowing faintly through the cracked door, Elias paused longer than usual. Snow clung to his boots, his breath fogged the air, and in his hands, tight, cautious, was the note Boone had left. He stepped forward, slowly, not like a guest, like someone unsure if they were allowed to be remembered. Boone stood inside, back to the wall, heart tapping, slow and uncertain. When Elias crossed the threshold, he didn't speak, couldn't, but he looked at Boone then, at the chair near the fire. Boone gave a quiet nod. The boy sat. Silence filled the room, thick and honest. No radio, no ticking clock. Just wood creaking beneath weight and the soft crackle of flame chewing through pine. Boone moved slow, poured 2 cups of warm water and honey he'd run out of tea long ago. He slid one across the table. Elias hesitated, then took it. Both drank like it meant something. Maybe it did. A few nights passed the same way. No questions, no explanations, just presence. And for Boone, that was harder than talking. Elias began to draw. He'd pull scrap paper from his coat and sketch with a dull pencil Boone left near the window. At first it was trees, snow, a horse. Then one night he drew Boone. Craggy face, thick eyebrows. That old scar beneath the left cheek. It wasn't perfect, but it was true. He'd seen him, really seen him. Boone studied the drawing with a strange ache in his chest. Not pride, not grief. Something older. Something like recognition. I don't deserve to be remembered this well, he muttered. Elias just looked at him, eyes steady, as if to say, you already are. The bond formed quiet and deep. Boone began leaving things out for Elias: an old pair of wool socks, a harmonica missing one reed, a carved horse with one leg chipped. Elias started leaving sketches behind on the mantel near Boone's bed, on the inside of the firewood lid. One of them made Boone stop breathing for a full 10 seconds. A woman, drawn from memory, not his own. hair pulled back in a bun, smile faint like she was trying to hold back laughter, a rose pinned to her collar. Margaret, just like he remembered her. Just like Elias had never seen her. Unless... Boone pressed the paper to his chest and whispered, "He knows." Later that week, Elias came early. His coat was soaked from melted snow, his hands red and raw. He held up a worn envelope. No address, no return. But Boone knew that handwriting. It was Margaret's. She must have written it before passing. Maybe never mailed it. Maybe it sat in some drawer for years before someone found it. Someone who knew where to look. He unfolded the letter with trembling hands. Elias watched unmoving. The ink was faded, but the words still sang. "If he ever comes back, tell him I forgave him the day he left. But Lord, how I wished he'd stayed." Boone covered his mouth jaw clenched tight. His eyes swam. He couldn't cry, not after all these years. But something broke loose inside him anyway. Not tears, not screams. Just a breath he hadn't let go in 30 years. That night, as the wind howled across Dry Willow, Elias stayed over for the first time. He curled up by the hearth on an old rug, arms wrapped around a blanket Boone hadn't used since '86. Boone sat in his chair, eyes closed, hands wrapped around a cup gone cold. He didn't speak, didn't move. But before the fire died, he whispered into the dark, "I should have stayed, Maggie, but this time, I won't leave." Elias didn't answer. But Boone didn't need him to. Some bonds don't need words. They just need someone who won't walk away. It began with the rain. Not the soft kind that whispers through pine needles, but the kind that hammers. The kind that makes the dirt bleed. The kind that carries memories you thought you'd buried. Boone felt it in his bones before the clouds even broke. Elias was by the window drawing again this time, a coyote, thin and clever-eyed. Boone had just poured warm broth when the hooves came. Distant at first, then closer. Steady, purposeful. One rider, not lost, not drunk, looking for something. Or someone. Boone stood without a word and reached for the shotgun by the door, not to fire, just to remember what it felt like. The man rode into view like a ghost from a dime novel. Long black coat hat pulled low, and a scar that split his cheek like dry leather. He didn't tie off his horse, didn't dismount. He just sat there, eyes hidden, the rain bouncing off his shoulders. "You Silas Boone?" Voice like gravel dragged across iron. Boone didn't answer right away. He looked at Elias, who stared from behind the curtain, small fingers curled tight around the windowsill. "Who's asking?" Boone replied at last. The man lifted his head. Something about the smirk on his face, cold, confident, set every nerve in Boone's spine on edge. "You used to know a woman named Margaret Rose." The name hit like a gunshot. Boone didn't flinch, but inside his soul blinked. That was a long time ago. "Not long enough," the man said. Turns out the stranger had no name worth remembering. He didn't give it, and Boone didn't ask again. But he carried something more dangerous than a gun. He carried a claim. A folded paper pulled from his coat, sealed in wax, older than the town's church. "Margaret left a deed, half this land, says it goes to her son." Boone took the paper, read it, felt the weight settle on his chest like dust on a coffin. He knew what this was. This wasn't about land. This was about claiming a legacy, claiming Elias. Boone looked up slowly. She had a son. She had a lot you didn't stick around to find out. The stranger left before sundown, but not without saying more than he should have. "Boy looks like her, you know." Same eyes, same silence. And with that, he rode off into the dark, leaving hoof prints filled with rain and a silence that couldn't be swept away. That night, Boone didn't eat, didn't talk. He sat in the same chair, staring at the deed, the fire, then Elias. The boy had crawled close, blanket over his knees, sketchbook in hand. He didn't ask what the paper meant, but his eyes said he already knew. And then, quiet as breath, he turned the sketchbook around. A new drawing. 3 men on horses, one with a black hat, and beside them a house burning. Boone's voice cracked when it finally came. "They're not done." Elias nodded. The stranger wasn't just there for truth. He was scouting, measuring. And Boone knew the type men who don't knock twice. By dawn, Boone was outside checking the locks. He reinforced the barn, hid Elias's sketchbooks, and dug up an old tin from beneath the tree stump. Inside was a pistol oiled and waiting. Not for pride, not for revenge, for protection. He sat Elias down at the table and drew a map, rough, handshaking, but clear. Escape routes, neighbors who could be trusted, where to run if things went wrong. But Elias didn't flinch, didn't cry. Instead, he reached across the table and placed a tiny, childlike drawing into Boone's palm. 2 figures, standing side by side, the cabin behind them, a storm overhead, but they were still standing. Boone looked at the boy. You'd stay. Elias didn't nod. He just stared, jaw tight, shoulders straight, eyes like stone. You're braver than me, Boone whispered. Always have been. That night it rained again. But Boone didn't close the door all the way. He left it cracked, left the fire lit. Because now the past wasn't knocking. It was coming back with its boots on. And Boone, he was done hiding. The snow didn't stop. For 2 days it fell thick and cruel, blanketing the valley in silence. A silence too clean, too perfect, like the world was trying to hide something ugly underneath. Boone had known that kind of quiet before the charge at Red River, before the night Margaret whispered, "I trust you," and he walked away anyway. Now it was back, and this time it came with footsteps. Not yet, but soon. He didn't tell Elias everything. Not yet, but the boy could feel it, truth buzzing under Boone's skin like a fever. That morning, Boone found him outside brushing snow off a tree stump to sit and draw. He was sketching a house on fire again, but this time, someone was inside, looking out through the flames. Boone sat beside him, breath fogging the air. You ever wonder why I stayed so quiet all these years? Elias didn't look up. He kept drawing lines growing darker. Boone clenched his hands together, bone to bone. Because I thought if I said it out loud, it'd become real. Still no answer. So Boone said the thing he feared most. You're my blood. The pencil stopped. Elias didn't move, didn't cry, just stared at the house he'd drawn burning. Your mother, she never gave up on me, even after I gave up on myself. He pulled the silver ring from his coat pocket, held it in his palm like an offering. This was hers. She gave it back the night I left, said if I ever found myself again, I'd know where home was. Boone reached for Elias's hand, hesitated, then placed the ring inside. The boy stared at it, no emotion, then slipped it into his coat. A long pause, then Elias finally lifted his eyes. They weren't soft, they weren't angry, they were clear. So what now? The boy's hand moved slowly, fingers to lips, lips to heart. Boone understood, do we run or do we stand? That night, Boone pulled out every map, every letter, every memory he'd buried. He told Elias about Hollow Creek, about Margaret's laughter, about the war that turned his hands into weapons and his heart into stone. He told him about the time he nearly turned back and didn't. And Elias, he listened with more patience than most grown men. When Boone finished, he looked at the boy like a man waiting to be sentenced, but Elias only nodded, then reached for Boone's hand and squeezed. Boone had spent a lifetime running from moments like this. Moments that stripped you down to the bone and asked, are you willing to love what might leave? But this time he didn't flinch. The fire cracked, the storm howled, and for the first time since Margaret died, Boone felt warm. Not from the hearth, from the choice. He had chosen truth, even if it cost him everything. So they came at dusk. 3 riders cloaked in shadow and snow. The stranger in black led them, eyes burning like coals under his wide-brimmed hat. No warning, no mercy. Just hooves pounding cold earth like judgment finally arriving. Boone stood on the porch, shotgun ready, heart steady. Elias was behind him, tucked near the corner wall, clutching the pistol Boone had taught him to hold, but not yet use. You don't pull the trigger unless the storm comes through the door, Boone had told him that morning. And if it does, Elias had signed. Then we hold the line, together. The lead rider dismounted. Boots crunched the snow like bone. You had your warning, old man. You've had your answer, Boone replied, voice like gravel and thunder. He's not yours, he never was. The stranger's mouth curled into a half smile. You think love makes him yours? No, Boone said, but standing here does. The other men spread out hands to their hips. Then silence. And for a moment, nothing moved, until Elias stepped forward, out from behind Boone. Small, steady, eyes clear. He held no gun, just a folded drawing in his hand. He walked straight to the man in black before Boone could stop him and held it up. The stranger looked down. A sketch. 3 figures, a house behind them. The third man, him facing the other way. Alone. Unchosen. Elias never said a word, didn't have to. The drawing said it all. You don't belong here, not because we hate you, but because you never stayed. The stranger stared for a long moment, then he laughed. Not cruel, not angry, just tired. Well, damn, he muttered, taking off his hat. Guess she raised him right after all. He dropped the drawing, mounted his horse, and just like that he turned, disappeared into the wind. Boone collapsed onto the porch, the weight of 30 years falling off his back all at once. Elias sat beside him, neither said a word. They just listened to the quiet. The storm had passed, and for once it left something standing. That night Boone lit the fire low, pulled a quilt around Elias, sat in his old chair, fingers wrapped around a warm mug, gaze fixed on nothing but memory. Your mother would have been proud, he whispered. Elias didn't move, but Boone saw the smallest nod. And for the first time since Margaret's death, Boone believed in tomorrow. Out in the hills, the wind died down, the snow stopped. Dry Willow slept in peace. And in one quiet cabin at the edge of it all, a man who once ran, finally stayed. And that, friends, is how the West keeps breathing through fire forgiveness, and the ones brave enough to face both. If this story touched something in you, something old, something quiet, then maybe you're not as alone as you think. Pull up a chair, subscribe. We've got more stories to tell, and the wind's still carrying them, out where the sun sets slow.